My name is Barry, and I'm 58 years old. Christmas has always been my favorite time of year, ever since I was a kid, growing up in small-town Iowa. There's something magical about the lights, the smell of pine needles, and families coming together. This past Christmas was supposed to be special. My granddaughter Emma was finally old enough to really understand the holiday, and it would be our first big family gathering since my wife Sarah passed away 3 years ago. I had decorated our house in Colorado Springs from top to bottom, spent weeks preparing the perfect feast, and wrapped presents with the care of someone who believed in Christmas miracles. But sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest. Before I share what happened that changed everything, let me ask, where are you watching this from today? If you're spending time with family this holiday season, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Now let me tell you about the Christmas gift my daughter Jessica gave me, one that I never saw coming. I've lived in the same house in Colorado Springs for 27 years now. Sarah and I bought it when Jessica was just a baby, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a big backyard and an oak tree that we planted the day we moved in. Every November, I start decorating for Christmas. Not just a few lights and a wreath, mind you. I'm talking about the full treatment. Lights along every roofline garland wrapped around the porch columns, and that oak tree lit up like a beacon you can see from 3 blocks away. This year felt especially important because it would be Emma's first real Christmas at Grandpa's house. Emma is my granddaughter, 6 years old, with her grandmother's bright blue eyes, and that same stubborn streak that runs through all the women in our family. She's been staying with me more and more lately while Jessica works. Jessica is my daughter, 28 years old now, working as a marketing manager for a tech company downtown. Ever since Sarah died, Jessica has been traveling constantly for work, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. Emma stays with me during those trips, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Sarah passed away from breast cancer 3 years ago. The doctors found it too late, and she was gone within 8 months of diagnosis. Those were the darkest days of my life. I was a high school history teacher for 30 years before I retired, and Sarah was a nurse at the children's hospital. We had our whole retirement planned out. Travel, visit national parks, spoil our grandchildren. Cancer took all of that away. But Emma, sweet little Emma, she brought light back into my world. While Jessica threw herself into work to deal with her grief, Emma needed stability. She needed bedtime stories and home-cooked meals and someone to help her with homework. She needed Christmas traditions and birthday parties and all the things that make childhood magical. I became that person for her, and truthfully, she saved me as much as I like to think I saved her. This December, I went all out preparing for Christmas. I baked sugar cookies using Sarah's recipe, the one Emma loves, where we roll out the dough together and she gets flour all over her nose. I bought a 12-foot Douglas fir and decorated it with ornaments Sarah and I had collected over 3 decades of marriage. Each one tells a story. The angel Jessica made in 2nd grade art class, the snowman from our trip to Vermont, the silver bells Sarah bought at a Christmas market in Germany during our anniversary trip. I planned the menu weeks in advance: roasted turkey with sage stuffing, mashed potatoes with real butter, and cream green bean casserole that Jessica loved as a child, and pumpkin pie made from scratch. I invited my brother David and his family, my sister Margaret, and her kids, plus a few close family friends. 12 people total for Christmas dinner, just like the old days, when Sarah would orchestrate these gatherings with military precision. Emma helped me wrap presents in the living room while we watched old Christmas movies. She insisted on putting extra tape on every package because she wanted to make sure nothing would come undone. We made paper snowflakes and hung them from the ceiling. We built a gingerbread house that looked more like a gingerbread disaster, but Emma was so proud of it that I displayed it right in the center of the dining room table. For the first time since Sarah died, I felt genuinely excited about Christmas. Emma's laughter filled the house again. The smell of cinnamon and pine needles replaced the antiseptic smell of grief that had lingered for too long. I even caught myself humming Christmas carols while I cooked something I hadn't done in years. Jessica promised she would take time off work and be here for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. She said she wanted this to be special for Emma, a return to the family traditions we had built over the years. I believed her. I trusted that she understood how important this was for all of us, especially for Emma, who had lost her grandmother and needed these moments of stability and love. I spent Christmas Eve morning polishing Sarah's good china and setting the dining room table with our best linens. Everything had to be perfect. This wasn't just dinner. This was about rebuilding our family, creating new memories while honoring the old ones. I wanted Emma to remember this Christmas as the day we all came back together. Jessica arrived on Christmas Eve around 4 in the afternoon, just as I was pulling my famous honey-glazed ham out of the oven. But she wasn't alone. She brought a man I had never met before, someone she introduced simply as Kyle. No warning, no phone call, asking if it was okay to bring a guest. Just Kyle standing in my living room, like he belonged there. Kyle was tall, probably 6'3", with perfectly styled hair and clothes that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. He wore a navy blue sweater that looked like it came from some expensive department store, and leather shoes so polished I could see my reflection in them. He had one of those firm handshakes that goes on too long, like he's trying to prove something, and when he smiled, it never quite reached his eyes. The first thing Kyle did was pull out his phone and start talking about cryptocurrency and stock portfolios. Not exactly Christmas Eve conversation, but I tried to be polite. After all, this was Jessica's guest, and I wanted to make a good impression. Maybe this was someone important to her, someone she cared about. But then Kyle started looking around the house like he was appraising real estate. He commented on the square footage, asked about property values in our neighborhood, and made suggestions about how I could modernize the kitchen to increase home equity. When I mentioned that Sarah and I had chosen this house because we loved the character and the memories we could build here, Kyle just nodded politely and said something about emotional attachments being bad for financial decisions. During dinner that night, Kyle dominated the conversation. He talked about his investment firm, his luxury apartment downtown, and his plans to expand his business into commercial real estate. Every story was designed to impress, to show how successful and sophisticated he was. When Emma tried to tell him about the gingerbread house we had built, he barely looked up from his phone. Jessica seemed different too. She kept apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. Sorry the house was so old-fashioned. Sorry dinner wasn't more exciting. Sorry Emma was being too loud when she laughed. The Jessica I knew, the little girl who used to help me rake leaves and always stood up for the underdog, was acting like a stranger in her own childhood home. When Emma spilled a little bit of juice on the tablecloth, something that never would have bothered Jessica, before she snapped at her daughter in a way that made my heart hurt. Emma's face crumpled, and she ran to me for comfort instead of her mother. Jessica just rolled her eyes and muttered something about Emma needing more discipline. After dinner, while I was cleaning dishes, I overheard Kyle on the phone in the living room. He was talking about a business deal, something about liquidating assets and maximizing returns. He kept using phrases like turning property into profit and cutting dead weight. At the time, I thought he was just conducting normal business. I had no idea he was talking about my life. That night, after Jessica and Kyle went to bed in the guest room, I sat in my kitchen drinking tea and trying to understand what was happening. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch while we were watching It's a Wonderful Life, and I carried her up to her little bedroom, the one that used to be Jessica's. As I tucked her in, she whispered that she didn't like Kyle very much because he didn't smile when she talked to him. I told her that sometimes adults are just tired and stressed, and that maybe Kyle would be friendlier tomorrow on Christmas Day. But honestly, I was starting to have doubts myself. Something felt off about the whole situation. Jessica had never brought anyone home before, and she had never acted so dismissive toward Emma. The warmth and excitement I had felt preparing for Christmas was starting to fade, replaced by a nagging worry that something was very wrong. Christmas morning started early, when Emma woke me up at 6:30 bouncing with excitement about opening presents. I made pancakes shaped like Christmas trees, while she sat at the kitchen counter in her pajamas, swinging her legs and chattering about Santa Claus. These were the moments I lived for the simple joy of a child who still believed in magic. Jessica and Kyle didn't come downstairs until almost 10 o'clock. Kyle immediately started checking his phone and making calls even on Christmas morning. Jessica seemed tense and distracted, barely paying attention when Emma showed her the new doll Santa had brought. I tried to create the warm family atmosphere I had planned, but it felt like I was working against a current that kept pulling us in different directions. Around 11, while I was preparing vegetables for our big Christmas dinner, I heard Kyle talking on the phone in the next room. He was speaking quietly, but something about his tone made me stop what I was doing and listen. He was talking about a real estate transaction, something about finalizing paperwork after the holidays, and clearing out properties for new buyers. Then I heard him say something that made my blood run cold. He mentioned an address, and it was my address. He was talking about my house like it was already sold, like it was just a matter of moving out an old tenant who didn't understand the situation. I stepped closer to the doorway, trying to hear more without being obvious. Kyle was explaining to whoever was on the phone that the current resident was elderly and would probably need help transitioning to assisted living. He used words like stubborn and unrealistic when describing someone's attachment to the property. My hands started shaking as I realized he was talking about me. But the real shock came when I heard Jessica's voice joining the conversation. She was talking to Kyle about legal documents, something about power of attorney and property transfer papers that had been signed when her mother was sick. My mind raced back to those terrible months when Sarah was dying, when I was so overwhelmed with hospital visits and treatment decisions that I barely understood half the papers people put in front of me to sign. Jessica had handled so many of the legal details during Sarah's illness. She said she was trying to help, trying to take some of the burden off my shoulders so I could focus on taking care of Sarah. I trusted her completely. I signed whatever she told me to sign because I was drowning in grief and fear and didn't have the energy to read through complicated legal documents. Now I was starting to understand that some of those papers might have given Jessica more control over our house than I realized. The house that Sarah and I had bought together, the house where we had raised Jessica, the house where Emma now felt safe and loved, might not be entirely mine anymore. I walked outside to the backyard, needing fresh air and space to think. The oak tree Sarah and I had planted was covered in snow, its branches heavy with the weight of a Colorado winter. I remembered the day we brought Jessica home from the hospital as a baby, how we stood under this same tree and talked about all the birthday parties and Christmas mornings we would share in this house. When I came back inside, I found Jessica searching through my desk in the home office. She claimed she was looking for batteries for Emma's new toy, but the desk drawers she had opened contained important papers, not batteries. When I asked what she was really doing, she got defensive and accused me of being paranoid. That afternoon, while I was cooking Christmas dinner for our guests, Emma came running into the kitchen crying. She said Kyle had told her that they were moving to New York soon, and that she probably wouldn't see Grandpa very much anymore because old people belonged in special places with other old people. When I asked Jessica about this, She dismissed it as Emma misunderstanding adult conversation. But I could see the truth in my granddaughter's eyes. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a little girl being told that her world was about to be turned upside down again, just when she had started to feel secure after losing her grandmother. As our family members started arriving for Christmas dinner, I tried to push down my growing panic and focus on being a good host. My brother David brought his wife and their twin boys. My sister Margaret came with her daughter and son-in-law. Old family friends who had been coming to our Christmas dinners for years walked through the door with hugs and bottles of wine and stories about their grandchildren. But underneath all the holiday cheer, I could feel something dark and deceptive growing. Jessica was acting like the perfect daughter, helping in the kitchen and making small talk with relatives. But I caught her whispering with Kyle in corners and exchanging looks that made me deeply uncomfortable. I realized that this Christmas dinner, which I had planned as a celebration of family and new beginnings, might actually be some kind of farewell party. Jessica and Kyle weren't here to rebuild our relationship. They were here to execute some kind of plan that would change everything, and they were waiting for the right moment to make their move. By 2 o'clock, our house was filled with the warm chaos of family Christmas. 12 adults and 4 children crowded around our extended dining room table, passing platters of turkey and stuffing, while Christmas music played softly in the background. Emma sat between me and my brother David, proudly showing off her new coloring books to anyone who would listen. For a few moments, I almost forgot about the dark undercurrent I had been sensing all morning. David pulled me aside while we were carving the turkey and told me how proud he was of the way I had stepped up for Emma after Sarah's death. He said he could see how much happier Emma was living with me, how much more confident and secure she seemed compared to the anxious little girl she had been right after Sarah passed away. His words meant everything to me, but I noticed Jessica's face tighten when she overheard the conversation. Kyle had been relatively quiet during the meal, occasionally checking his phone and making polite small talk with relatives, but I could tell he was getting restless. When my sister Margaret asked about his work, he launched into an elaborate explanation of his investment strategies and business philosophy. He talked about the importance of making hard decisions for long-term financial gain, even when those decisions might seem heartless to people who don't understand business. Everything Kyle said seemed to have a double meaning, like he was delivering some kind of coded message to Jessica while appearing to make normal conversation with my family. When David asked about his plans for the new year, Kyle smiled and said something about helping families make necessary transitions and maximizing the value of their assets. Around 3:30, after we had finished the main course and were getting ready for dessert, Kyle suggested we all have a toast with the expensive wine he had brought. He said he wanted to celebrate family and new beginnings, which should have sounded lovely, but somehow felt ominous coming from him. As glasses were filled and passed around the table, Kyle stood up and began what sounded like a prepared speech. He talked about the importance of looking forward instead of backward, about embracing change instead of clinging to the past. He said that sometimes love means making difficult decisions that other people might not understand at first. I was starting to feel genuinely alarmed by the direction of this toast when my nephew asked me to tell the story about the Christmas when Jessica was 7 and tried to stay awake all night to catch Santa Claus. It was a family favorite, a story I had told many times over the years about how Jessica had hidden behind the Christmas tree and fallen asleep there, and how Sarah and I had carried her to bed after we finished putting out presents. As I told the story, I watched Jessica's face grow increasingly uncomfortable. When I mentioned how much Sarah had loved Christmas traditions and how important it was to preserve family memories in this house, Jessica actually rolled her eyes and looked at Kyle like I was embarrassing her. That's when Kyle decided to escalate things. He started talking about how dwelling on the past was unhealthy especially for elderly people who might need help adapting to changing circumstances. He said that sometimes families had to make tough choices about living situations, and that resistance to change often came from fear rather than logic. I realized that Kyle was essentially giving a public justification for whatever they had planned to do to me. He was setting up the narrative that I was a stubborn old man who couldn't take care of himself and needed family intervention for my own good. When I tried to respond by talking about how happy and stable Emma had been living with me, and how important it was for her to have consistency after losing her grandmother, Jessica suddenly snapped. She said I was living in a fantasy and that I didn't understand the realities of modern life or what was best for Emma's future. The conversation was becoming increasingly tense, and I could see my relatives looking confused and uncomfortable. This was supposed to be a joyful Christmas dinner, not a family confrontation. But something had shifted, and I could feel that we were approaching a point of no return. That's when Jessica stood up holding her wine glass and said she had something important to tell everyone. She said that she and Kyle had been doing a lot of thinking about what was best for Emma, and they had made some decisions about the future that everyone needed to understand. The room fell quiet as Jessica began to explain that Emma would be moving to New York with her and Kyle, where there would be better schools and more opportunities. She said that I had done a wonderful job helping with Emma after Sarah died, but that it was time for things to return to normal, with Emma living with her mother full-time. Then she said the words that made everything crystal clear. She said that I would also need to make some changes, that the house was too big for one person, and that it would be better for everyone if I moved somewhere more appropriate for someone my age. When my brother David asked what she meant by more appropriate, Jessica looked directly at me and said that she and Kyle thought I would be happier in a senior living community where I would have people my own age to socialize with and wouldn't have to worry about maintaining such a large house. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was sitting in my dining room eating food I had prepared, announcing to my family that she was taking my granddaughter away and forcing me to sell the house I had lived in for 27 years. When I asked Jessica if we could discuss this privately instead of in front of everyone, she said there was nothing to discuss. She said the decisions had already been made and that it was better for me to hear about them with family support around me. That's when I realized this whole Christmas gathering had been orchestrated as some kind of intervention. Jessica and Kyle had planned this moment, choosing Christmas Day, when all my relatives would be present, thinking that public pressure would make me accept their plan without a fight. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room watching me. I looked at my granddaughter, Emma, who was staring at her mother with confusion and growing fear. I looked at my brother and sister, who were clearly shocked by what they were hearing. I looked at Jessica, this daughter I had raised with so much love and hope, and I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. And that's when Jessica made the biggest mistake of her life. When I opened my mouth to speak to try to address this situation with some dignity and rationality, she cut me off mid-sentence. She said that this was her house now, and that I was just living here because she allowed it. She said that I had no legal right to make decisions about Emma or the property, and that I needed to accept reality and stop acting like a selfish old man who couldn't let go of the past. Then she took her wine glass filled with the expensive red wine Kyle had brought, and she threw the entire contents directly at my face. The wine hit me like a slap, cold and shocking, running down my face and neck and staining my white Christmas shirt. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma started crying. My sister gasped. Kyle actually smiled, like he was proud of what Jessica had done. And in that moment, everything became perfectly clear. This was not my daughter speaking. This was a stranger who had decided that I was an obstacle to be removed, and she was willing to humiliate me in front of my entire family to establish her dominance. I stood there for a long moment, wine dripping from my chin, while everyone stared in complete shock. Emma was sobbing now, reaching out her little arms toward me, but Jessica grabbed her wrist and told her to sit down and be quiet. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even wipe the wine from my face right away. Instead, I looked directly at Jessica and said the words that would change both our lives forever. I reached for the napkin beside my plate and slowly, deliberately wiped the wine from my face while maintaining eye contact with Jessica. The room was so quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the same clock that had counted down 27 years of Christmas mornings in this house. When I spoke, my voice was calm and steady, though I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I said, "Jessica, you've made your choice. Now it's time for me to make mine." Then I turned to address my family members. These people who had shared decades of holidays with Sarah and me, who had watched Jessica grow up in this house, who knew the truth of our family history. I told them that I was sorry their Christmas dinner had been ruined, and that they should please go home to their own families, where they could finish the holiday in peace. My brother David started to protest, saying he wanted to understand what was happening and how he could help resolve this situation. But I shook my head and told him that some things couldn't be resolved with family mediation. Some betrayals were too deep, some lines too permanently crossed. One by one, my relatives gathered their coats and bags, hugging me tightly and whispering words of support. Emma tried to run to me as they were leaving, but Jessica held her back, telling her that Grandpa was upset and needed time to think about his behavior. The look of confusion and fear in my granddaughter's eyes broke my heart. But I knew that what I was about to do would ultimately protect her from more pain. After everyone left, Jessica and Kyle remained in the living room, talking quietly and occasionally glancing toward the kitchen, where I was cleaning wine stains off the table. I could hear Kyle reassuring Jessica that she had done the right thing, that sometimes shock tactics were necessary to make stubborn people face reality. While they talked, I walked to my home office and pulled out the phone number for Robert Chen, the attorney who had helped Sarah and me with our wills and estate planning. Robert had been Sarah's friend since college, and he had guided us through the legal complexities during her illness. I trusted him completely, and I knew he would remember the details of our arrangements even on Christmas Day. When Robert answered his phone, I could hear Christmas music and children's laughter in the background. I apologized for interrupting his family celebration, but I told him I had an urgent legal question that couldn't wait. Robert's voice immediately became serious when I described what had happened. I asked him to explain exactly what rights Jessica had regarding our house based on the papers I had signed during Sarah's illness. What he told me was both alarming and empowering. During those chaotic months when Sarah was dying, I had indeed signed documents that gave Jessica power of attorney to help manage our affairs. However, the house itself was held in a specific type of trust that Sarah had insisted on creating years earlier. According to the terms of that trust, I retained 60% ownership of the property, while Jessica inherited Sarah's 40% share. This meant that while Jessica was technically a part owner of the house, she could not sell it, mortgage it, or force me to leave without my explicit consent. More importantly, any financial transactions she had made using the house as collateral, without my knowledge, were legally invalid and potentially fraudulent. Robert asked if I believed Jessica had used her power of attorney inappropriately, and I told him about Kyle's phone conversations regarding real estate transactions and liquidating assets. Robert's voice became very grave as he explained that if Jessica had mortgaged or promised the house to investors without my consent, she could face serious legal consequences, including criminal fraud charges. He advised me to document everything I could remember about Kyle's statements and Jessica's actions, and to gather any papers or documents that might show evidence of unauthorized financial activity. He said he would drive to his office that evening to review our files and prepare for what might become a complex legal battle. But Robert saved the most important information for last. He asked about Emma's custody situation, and when I explained that Jessica traveled constantly for work, while Emma lived primarily with me, he told me something that changed everything. Under Colorado law, if I could demonstrate that I had been Emma's primary caregiver and that Jessica had been neglecting her parental responsibilities, I could petition for legal custody. The fact that Jessica was planning to uproot Emma from a stable living situation to move across the country with a man Emma barely knew could be considered contrary to the child's best interests. After I hung up with Robert, I sat in my office for a long time staring at the family photos on my desk. Pictures of Sarah holding baby Jessica. Pictures of Jessica's high school graduation. Pictures of Emma's first steps in our backyard. I thought about all the sacrifices Sarah and I had made to give Jessica every opportunity, all the love and support we had provided, and how thoroughly she was prepared to throw that away for whatever Kyle had promised her. But I also thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully upstairs in her little bedroom, decorated with butterfly stickers and drawings she had made at school. Emma, who called me Papa Bear and still believed that love and family were the most important things in the world. Emma, who deserved better than to be used as a pawn in whatever game Jessica and Kyle were playing. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to fight just to preserve my own comfort or to punish Jessica for her betrayal. I was going to fight to protect Emma from the chaos and instability that Jessica was determined to create. I was going to fight for the principle that children deserve security and love more than they deserve parents who prioritize money and status over family bonds. I spent the rest of Christmas night documenting everything I could remember about Kyle's phone conversations, Jessica's changed behavior, and the timeline of events that had led to this confrontation. I gathered financial documents that showed my ongoing investment in Emma's care school records, that listed me as her primary emergency contact, and medical records showing that I had been the one taking her to doctor appointments and managing her health care. By dawn on December 26th, I had compiled a comprehensive case file that told the story of a loving grandfather who had stepped up to provide stability for his granddaughter when her mother became too focused on career and new relationships to prioritize her child's needs. When Jessica and Kyle came downstairs that morning, they found me sitting at the kitchen table with legal documents spread out in front of me. Jessica demanded to know what I was doing, and I told her exactly what Robert had explained to me about the house ownership and the invalidity of any transactions she might have made without my consent. The look of shock and fear that crossed Kyle's face told me everything I needed to know. He had been counting on Jessica's inheritance to fund some scheme, and now he realized that his calculations had been completely wrong. Jessica tried to argue that she had every right to make decisions about the house, but when I showed her the trust documents that clearly outlined my majority ownership, she became defensive and started making threats about taking Emma away, where I would never see her again. That's when I played my final card. I told Jessica that I had already contacted Robert Chen and that we would be filing papers that morning for emergency custody of Emma, based on Jessica's neglect and her plan to disrupt Emma's stable living situation for inappropriate reasons. The transformation in Jessica's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The confident, controlling woman who had thrown wine in my face just hours earlier suddenly looked panicked and uncertain. Kyle, meanwhile, had gone completely pale and was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to figure out how to extract himself from what was rapidly becoming a legal nightmare. Jessica's first reaction was denial. She claimed that she had never neglected Emma, that she was a devoted mother who was simply trying to provide better opportunities for her daughter. She insisted that moving to New York would give Emma access to better schools and more cultural experiences than she could have in Colorado Springs. But when I asked her to name Emma's teacher, her pediatrician, her best friend at school, or her favorite bedtime story, Jessica couldn't answer a single question. I had attended every parent-teacher conference, taken Emma to every doctor's appointment, arranged every playdate, and read every bedtime story for the past 2 years, while Jessica was traveling for work or focused on her career. Kyle tried to interject, claiming that I was being manipulative and using Emma as a weapon to maintain control over Jessica. He said that successful women often had to make difficult choices between career advancement and traditional domestic responsibilities, and that I was trying to punish Jessica for being ambitious. I looked Kyle directly in the eye and told him that I didn't care about his opinions on women's careers or family dynamics. What I cared about was Emma's well-being, and anyone with eyes could see that Emma was thriving in the stable, loving environment we had created together. When Jessica realized that her legal position was much weaker than she had believed, she tried a different approach. She started crying and claiming that she had been under tremendous pressure from Kyle to make these decisions, that she had never really wanted to force me out of the house or take Emma away from me. She said that Kyle had convinced her that she needed to establish financial independence, and that keeping me involved in Emma's care was preventing her from moving forward with her life. She begged me to understand that she had been grieving her mother's death too, and that she had made mistakes because she was overwhelmed and confused. For a moment, I felt the old parental instinct to comfort and forgive, to find a way to work together for Emma's sake. But then I remembered the calculated cruelty of throwing wine in my face in front of my entire family, the months of planning this betrayal while pretending to be a loving daughter, and the fear in Emma's eyes when she learned she might be taken away from the only stable home she had known. Kyle must have sensed that Jessica's emotional appeal was having some effect, because he immediately jumped in to remind her that they had already made commitments that couldn't be undone. He started talking about investors and timelines and legal obligations, making it clear that even if Jessica wanted to back down, there were other people involved who expected certain outcomes. That's when I realized that Jessica had gotten herself entangled in something much more complex than a simple family dispute. Kyle wasn't just her boyfriend. He was some kind of business partner who had been using her access to our family's assets to fund his ventures. Jessica had become a willing participant in defrauding her own father. I told Jessica that if she truly regretted her actions and wanted to make things right, she could start by being completely honest about what financial arrangements she had made with Kyle and how much of our family's assets were at risk. I said that if she cooperated fully with Robert Chen and helped us unravel whatever schemes Kyle had created, I might be willing to work with her on a custody arrangement that allowed her to remain part of Emma's life. But if she continued to lie, threaten, or prioritize Kyle's interests over Emma's well-being, I would pursue full custody and ensure that she had only supervised visitation rights until she could prove that she was capable of putting her daughter's needs first. Kyle tried to convince Jessica not to cooperate, reminding her that she could face serious legal consequences if she admitted to any wrongdoing. He painted a picture of a lengthy court battle that would drain our family's resources and traumatize Emma. But Jessica was finally beginning to understand the full scope of what she had gotten herself into. When Kyle stepped out to take a phone call, she broke down completely and told me the truth about their relationship and the financial arrangements they had made. Kyle had approached her at a business conference 6 months earlier. He had researched her family background and knew about Sarah's death and the inheritance she had received. He had systematically courted her, convinced her that she deserved a more sophisticated lifestyle than she could have in Colorado Springs, and gradually introduced the idea of liquidating her family assets to fund their new life together. Jessica had used her power of attorney to take out a second mortgage on the house, believing that she had every right to do so as Sarah's heir. The money had gone into Kyle's investment fund, which he claimed would triple their initial investment within a year. But the investments had failed, and now Kyle owed money to people who were not patient or understanding about delayed returns. Jessica realized that she had been manipulated and used, but she was terrified about the legal and financial consequences of admitting her mistakes. She was also terrified of the people Kyle owed money to, who had apparently been asking questions about when they could expect repayment. As the full picture became clear, I felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and genuine fear for Jessica's safety. She had been naive and selfish, but she had also been exploited by someone who had deliberately targeted our family for financial gain. I told Jessica that the only way forward was complete honesty and full cooperation with legal authorities. We would work with Robert to unravel the financial mess she had created, report Kyle's activities to the appropriate authorities, and focus on protecting Emma from any further instability. Over the next 3 months, the legal battle that followed was more complex and emotionally draining than anything I had experienced even during Sarah's illness. Robert Chen worked tirelessly to untangle the financial web that Kyle had created around our family assets, while also building a custody case that would protect Emma's best interests. The investigation revealed that Kyle had been running what amounted to a sophisticated con game, targeting recently widowed women with significant assets and using romantic relationships to gain access to their financial resources. Jessica was not his first victim, but she might have been his most valuable one because of the property and inheritance she could access. The second mortgage Jessica had taken out on our house was indeed illegal, since she didn't have the authority to encumber my majority ownership without my consent. However, the lending company Kyle had connected her with was part of a network of predatory lenders who specialized in these gray area transactions. Recovering the money and clearing the title would require months of litigation. Jessica's cooperation with the investigation was essential, but it was also personally devastating for her. She had to admit in court documents that she had been planning to defraud her own father, and that she had prioritized a romantic relationship over her daughter's stability. She had to testify about Kyle's manipulation tactics and provide evidence that helped prosecutors build a case against him for elder abuse and financial exploitation. Kyle, meanwhile, had disappeared completely by mid-January. The phone number Jessica had for him was disconnected, and the address of his supposed investment firm turned out to be a mail forwarding service. Robert suspected that Kyle had moved on to target other families, while leaving Jessica to face the legal consequences alone. The custody hearing was scheduled for March 15th, and I spent weeks preparing testimony and gathering evidence that demonstrated my role as Emma's primary caregiver. Emma's teachers, her pediatrician, our neighbors, and my family members all provided statements supporting my petition for legal custody. Emma herself was interviewed by a family court counselor, a gentlewoman named Dr. Patricia Williams, who specialized in helping children navigate family transitions. Dr. Williams spent several sessions with Emma using play therapy and art projects to understand her feelings about the proposed changes to her living situation. The report Dr. Williams submitted to the court was both heartbreaking and vindicating. Emma had drawn pictures of herself living in 2 different houses, one where she was smiling and surrounded by pets, toys, and a figure labeled Papa Bear, and another where she was alone in a tall building with no yard and no familiar objects around her. When Dr. Williams asked Emma where she felt safest and happiest, Emma consistently chose to talk about activities and memories associated with living with me. She talked about making cookies together, reading stories before bed, and feeling protected when she had nightmares about losing her grandmother. Most importantly, Dr. Williams determined that Emma had formed a secure attachment to me that would be severely damaged if she were forced to leave our home and move across the country with someone she barely knew. The report recommended that Emma remain in my custody with a gradual reintegration plan that would allow Jessica to rebuild a healthy relationship with her daughter over time. The court hearing itself was emotionally devastating, but legally straightforward. Jessica's attorney tried to argue that she had been the victim of manipulation and deserved a chance to prove herself as a responsible mother. But the evidence of financial fraud, the testimony about her neglect of Emma's daily needs, and her own admission that she had planned to uproot Emma from a stable environment for inappropriate reasons, made the judge's decision clear. I was granted full legal custody of Emma, with Jessica receiving supervised visitation rights twice a month. Jessica would also be required to complete parenting classes and financial counseling before she could petition for expanded visitation. The house remained entirely in my name after the illegal mortgage was voided, and Jessica was ordered to pay restitution for the legal costs associated with clearing the title. But the most important outcome was Emma's reaction when Dr. Williams explained to her that she would continue living with Papa Bear in the house she loved, with the bedroom she had decorated, and the backyard where she felt safe to play. The relief and joy in her eyes reminded me why this fight had been necessary, no matter how painful the process had been. Jessica left Colorado Springs immediately after the court hearing. She sent Emma a few letters and postcards over the following months, but she never returned for her scheduled visits. Robert eventually received notice from an attorney in California that Jessica wanted to relinquish her parental rights entirely so she could start over without the legal and financial obligations that connected her to her past mistakes. The year that followed was a journey of healing and rediscovery for both Emma and me. In the immediate aftermath of the custody battle, Emma went through a period of confusion and sadness about her mother's absence. She asked difficult questions about why Jessica had left and whether she would ever come back. Dr. Williams continued working with Emma through the transition, helping her understand that sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt the people they love, but that those mistakes don't mean Emma did anything wrong or that she wasn't worthy of love. We established new routines and traditions that honored the past while creating space for growth and healing. I joined a support group for grandparents who were raising grandchildren, where I met other men and women facing similar challenges. Listening to their stories helped me understand that our situation, while painful, was not unique. There was a whole community of people who had stepped up to provide stability for children when their parents were unable or unwilling to do so. Through this group, I met Margaret Sullivan, a widow who was raising her grandson after her daughter's struggle with addiction. Margaret became a close friend, and eventually something more, showing me that it was possible to find companionship and love again even after experiencing deep betrayal and loss. Emma flourished in the stable environment we maintained together. Her grades improved, she made new friends at school, and she began participating in activities like dance classes and soccer that gave her confidence and joy. She still talked about her mother sometimes, usually when she was sad or confused about something, but she no longer seemed anxious about losing the security of our home. We also worked together to create new traditions that belonged to us. We started a garden in the backyard where Emma could grow vegetables and flowers. We began taking annual camping trips to national parks, something Sarah and I had always planned to do with grandchildren. We established a weekly routine of cooking dinner together on Sundays, trying new recipes, and talking about our week. The financial recovery took longer, but Robert's diligent work eventually recovered most of the money Jessica had lost to Kyle's schemes. We learned that Kyle had been arrested in Arizona for running similar cons on other families, and that Jessica's cooperation with the investigation had been instrumental in building the case against him. More importantly, the experience taught me valuable lessons about setting boundaries and protecting the people I love from those who would exploit family bonds for personal gain. I realized that my instinct to always forgive and try to rebuild relationships had made me vulnerable to manipulation, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior. Emma and I also began volunteering at a local food bank, helping families who were struggling during difficult times. Working together to support other people in need gave Emma a sense of purpose and helped her understand that our own challenges were part of a larger human experience of loss recovery and mutual support. The second Christmas after the custody battle approached, Emma asked if we could invite some of our new friends from the support group to join us for dinner. She wanted to make sure that other children who might not have traditional family celebrations would have somewhere to feel welcome and loved. We spent weeks planning a Christmas dinner for 15 people, including several other grandparent caregivers and their grandchildren. Emma helped me decorate the house with even more enthusiasm than she had shown the previous year, and she insisted on making place cards for each guest with personalized messages about what she appreciated about each person. The dinner was everything I had hoped our previous Christmas celebration would be. Children laughed and played together, while adults shared stories and offered mutual support. Emma served as the unofficial hostess, making sure everyone felt included and comfortable in our home. During the toasts before dinner, Emma stood up with her glass of apple cider and said something that brought tears to my eyes. She said that she used to think family meant the people you were born with, but now she understood that family meant the people who choose to love and take care of each other every day. She thanked everyone for being part of her chosen family and for showing her that love doesn't end when people disappoint you, but sometimes it begins in new places with new people who understand what truly matters. As I looked around the table at these friends who had become family, at Emma's bright smile and confident voice, at the home we had filled with warmth and laughter. Despite everything we had endured, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. The wine stain was long gone from the dining room tablecloth, but the lessons learned from that terrible Christmas remained. Sometimes the people who claim to love you will betray that love for reasons you can't control or understand. But that doesn't mean love itself is unreliable or that family bonds are meaningless. It means that real love requires courage, boundaries, and the wisdom to distinguish between people who genuinely care about your well-being and people who are willing to exploit your emotions for their own benefit. It means that sometimes protecting the people you love requires making difficult decisions that might seem harsh to outside observers, but are necessary for creating genuine safety and stability. Most importantly, it means that family is not determined by genetics or legal documents, but by the daily choice to show up with consistency, compassion, and commitment to each other's growth and happiness. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love from people who claimed to care about them? Share your story in the comments below, and please hit the like button. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about the complex realities of family relationships and the courage it takes to choose love over obligation. Thank you for listening to this deeply personal story. And remember that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the boundary that protects them from harm. This Christmas season, may you find the wisdom to recognize the difference between people who add to your peace and those who threaten it. And may you have the courage to choose relationships that honor your worth and well-being.